Zoom. Thanks, Stephen, for the warning. We are being recorded. If you are here to learn about the resolutions for MAMUN 2024, then you are in the right place. It's 5:01. I see we have 13 participants. I think being cognizant of everyone's time will get started, but if people filter in, hopefully they'll be able to catch up. Hi, I'm Becca Zaris. I'm a Magic staffer. I've been on staff for 11 or 12 years now. And with me is George Rabati. George, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
I'm George. I'm a master's student at U of M. This is my third-ish year on MAMUN staff, and I participated as a delegate for 3 years as well.
Thanks, George. Flexing the U of M credentials. If George, could you share the PowerPoint? We'll get started.
Should be good to go.
All right,
Can I just
thanks.
get a thumbs up? People can see it.
I can, yes.
Perfect.
All right, so we have some important updates for MAMUN this year. So this is new. Resolutions for the General Assembly topic are going to be required prior to the conference. GA resolutions are going to be due February 29th by 5 p.m. That's an online submission. And the Magic staff will review the submitted resolutions, and then the Magic staff will select those resolutions to be considered at the General Assembly at MAMUN based on quality, content, and originality. So the goal of today is to help clear up any questions you might have about that process. And so resolutions in committee. So this is while you are at MAMUN. They're going to be the same as before if you've been to one of our conferences. So the delegates are going to draft the resolutions in those committees, as well as Security Council, during debate at MAMUN. During debate at MAMUN, you're going to have the opportunity to work with the other delegates in your room to draft and co-sponsor and discuss resolutions for each topic during your allotted time. And then delegates are encouraged to think through issues and topics for resolutions prior to the conference, but you should not be bringing pre-drafted resolutions to your committees. We really want you to collaborate with other students at MAMUN to draft your committee resolutions. All right, so resolutions for the General Assembly. Again, these are going to be submitted prior to the conference. They're going to be submitted by your entire delegation. It's not just an individual delegate, and they're going to be discussed and voted on during General Assembly. There's that due date for you again, February 29th by 5 p.m. And resolutions are only accepted by online submission. For the General Assembly, we will not be accepting resolutions for the General Assembly at the conference. And we have the link, but it is pretty simple to find on our website under the position papers and resolutions tab. And we ask that you don't submit a Google document or another Word document. You're just going to copy and paste your resolution into the submission link text box. And we'll go over this on a further slide, but only number the operative clauses, and we ask that you do not number the individual lines. And yay, our General Assembly topic this year. After much debate, we landed on protection of global climate for present and future generations of humankind. There is a topic guide live on our website. There's the link for you, but you can also just go to MAMUN online and click our MAMUN and the topic guides tab to read more about that. All right, yay. Before you start writing, we suggest you do two important things. One, research, and two, look at samples. So in regards to research, I'm sure you do this for classes that you're currently in. Sometimes I know I'm curious just about things in the real world, and I'll say, I'm going to start with a Google search to figure out something that I'm interested in. So you can start broad with something like a Google search, but then you do want to narrow in and rely on peer-reviewed or reliable sources. So this could be peer-reviewed articles. You could go to a country's delegation website. That would be a good place to start. And then when you're researching for your topic, you want to focus on three things: the background, which is the history of the issue, what countries are involved, what actions may have been taken. Hi, Santa, would you be able to mute your microphone? Or, I have the power to mute it, so I'm going to mute it for you. Another thing you'd want to focus on is policy. So this is your country's response to the topic. It could be past actions, could be current actions they're taking. Then you're going to want to focus on possible proposals. So these are solutions to the topic and what that can be to solve the issue. For inspiration, what solutions have the international community or your country thought of, maybe for similar issues? Might be a good place to start. All right, George, ready for the next one? Here we go. Oh, we also encourage you to look at samples. So we do have some past student resolutions available on our website for you to look at. I think this really helps in terms of getting the formatting down. I know when I was a delegate, I often felt intimidated that I wasn't writing in the correct format or wasn't writing like the real UN does. But once you can look at a sample, I think that'll help ease any concerns you might have about formatting. You can also look at UN General Assembly resolutions for format, and that is available. Again, you could do a Google search, but it should be available on research.un.org, and you can look up resolutions that have been passed. One note about plagiarism. Thank you, George. So plagiarism may result into disqualification for award eligibility. So we ask that you do not submit anything that is not entirely your own writing. Do not copy and paste from real resolutions or even other student resolutions from previous conferences. Don't use ChatGPT or any other AI software to write your resolution. All the work that you submit must be your own, and failure to comply may result in disqualification and award eligibility. Okay, ready for the next, George? George, I believe you're taking this part.
Yes. So getting more into what we've talked about, kind of resolution does this nebulous thing, but what is actually in a resolution? It's made up of three parts. So you start off with the subject, that's basically the header of an essay. And it's just saying what body is actually going to be taking this action. You as a nation, what body are you writing to? So for example, the General Assembly could be the Science and Technology Committee, just whoever is going to be taking that action. Then there's the preambulatory clauses, which are your intro. That's the facts, the history of the issue, what's been done already. And then there's the operative clauses. That's kind of the meat of the resolution. What actions you are going to try and take, what actions you want the body to do in order to try and solve. In terms of formatting for resolutions can be a little bit tricky. It's also a little bit different than how you would write a normal essay. For a properly formatted resolution, it is one very, very long sentence. So you have your subjects and your preemptory clauses are all separated by commas. The preamps are separated by the specific phrase, comma, and you're separating your operatives with semicolons. And all the way at the very, very end, you're going to have that period. This is something that can be a little bit tricky to kind of get yourself out of the idea of writing full sentences, because everything should be phrases, since again, it ends up being one really, really long sentence for the resolution. That's something that will take a little bit of practice, but once you get going with it, it gets kind of natural. So going to those preambulatory clauses that we talked about, this is effectively that intro to what a normal essay would be. That's preambulatory clauses means pre, so it's what has already happened. Up to this point, who's involved with the issues, what is the topic, the impact. This is a really good place to put in statistics, So if you have something like a death toll from a famine, something like that, this would be the point to put that in to show the impact of the issue. This is also where you would cite documents. So if there's past UN resolutions, treaties between countries, or declarations made by individual countries, this is where you would want to cite it. In the end, it's just a recognition of what has already been done around this issue. The other big thing about the preambulatory clause is why. Why is the GA addressing the topic? Why is it important that they take on this topic? So it's really important that whatever you're talking about in your preambulatory clauses relate to the actions that are going to be taken in the operative clauses. If your preambulatory clauses don't directly relate to what you're talking about in the operatives, it's not necessarily the best idea to put it in, though it is really important to note, again, preambulatory clauses are free. You don't want to define any action that you are going to take, only what has already happened. For the formatting of these, each of the preambulatory clauses are separated by a comma and then each clause is going to begin with a preambulatory phrase that's going to be capitalized. So the important thing with these phrases is that they are it's kind of these action words. So every preambulatory clause is going to start with one. So something like alarmed by, having adopted. Your chairs and other delegates are also there to help. It can be a little bit difficult to come up with a different word for each one. So if you're having trouble, do not be afraid to ask. Okay, moving to the operative clauses, what the resolution is actually going to do. This is where you have all of your calls for action. So again, this should all stay in line with whatever the goals of the UN are. You're not going to declare war in a resolution, but actions you want to take to maintain peace and security, promote international cooperation. Say you want to start a fund to help with a refugee issue or put money into technology development. That is what's going to happen in the operative clause. This is where all of the solutions are. So you want to relate to the facts that you're laying out in the preambulatory clauses, but the operative clauses should basically support one another and build up what the resolution is actually doing. It is also really important, if you want to write a good resolution, that your operative clauses are substantive. You want them to have enough detail to be really a complete solution. Putting in end goals, talking about specific nations that need to be involved for this to work, what kind of aid you're sending. I could write a resolution that is just one clause that is give aid to the countries in need. And technically, that is a proper resolution, but it's so broad, it would never actually accomplish anything. You need a lot more detail and you want to be a lot more clear about what specifically you want to do in order to have a really good, strong resolution. For the formatting the operative clauses, these are, again, as Becky had mentioned, they're numbered. They're starting with that same idea of those phrases that are capitalized. They're ending with a semicolon, but then all the way at the very, very end, it's going to be a period to finish off that one really long sentence. In terms of the operative phrases, these all end in so it's something like designates, recommends, requests, calls upon, things that are taking a specific action or asking an action to be done rather than recognizing what has already happened. In terms of, this is just an example of a resolution. I'm going to give you guys a second to read this over rather than me reading it over myself. But you can see up top, we have the header. And then in red, that's going back to that subject. So who is being written to? In green, you have the preambulatory clauses, what has already happened. And then in black at the bottom, you have the operative clauses. What actions are we trying to take? So I'll give you guys a second to read that. So as we can see, each of the start of our clauses have those specific phrases. So calling and convinced is referencing what's already happened. Commends, that's an action. Urges, that's asking someone to do something. Each of our preambs are a comma and then our first operative has a semicolon. Your second operative, because it's the last one, has a period at the end. So this is kind of the general formatting. Your guys' resolutions are probably going to be a good bit longer than this, but they're going to follow a very, very similar format. In terms of submitting a resolution, it's the 21st century. We don't have to write everything down on paper, and that can be a little bit tedious. So we do all of our resolution submissions online. So this is just a simple form. Only one person is going to actually submit the resolution when multiple people are writing it. You're going to just copy paste everything into these text boxes. And it's just really important. So again, don't number lines. You don't have to number the preambles, but your operative clauses should be numbered. The first step after you guys submit it is for us up on the dais, who is leading the committee, to go through and just reformat it with all the tabs and all the spacing. So having that be numbered properly makes it a lot easier for us to do that. Actually, before we get to amendments, are there any questions on kind of that meat of the resolution, preambles, operatives, formatting? All right, Becca, do you want to take it away with amendments?
Sure. And if at any time you have a question, you can type it in the chat. We know last week, if you attended the position paper training, if you have any questions about that, but writing your position paper is going to help you write a resolution in the future as well. So they are connected. But we want to talk about amendments. So amendments are going to happen at MAMUN, so at the conference. So during the General Assembly debate, your delegations will be able to submit amendments to the dais. Amendments are proposed changes to a resolution. They're used to modify both preambles and operatives, although it's probably more important to modify the operative, since that is the, as George said, meat of the resolution. That's the actions you're taking. You can, modify preambles, but usually if that's just laying out the history, it might be a better use of your time to focus on the operatives. So one amendment can make any number of changes at once, and an amendment is going to be submitted to the chair. You need sorry, that's very small, 1/3 of the body to bring it to the floor, and then it'll be voted on by the General Assembly as a whole during your voting procedure. So actions that are allowed in amendments, you can move to strike words or whole clauses. That could be operatives or preambles. You can add, so you can add in words or whole clauses. You can also change words within a clause. I believe my next slide is an example of an amendment that you might see. Yes. So we're going to have amendment forms at MAMUN. So there'll be lines to fill in what country is submitting this amendment, who is co-sponsoring it, and then what resolution this amendment is being proposed for. So here we have the country of Genovia, co-sponsored by Fredonia and Oceania. And this amendment does 3 separate things. So it strikes operative clause 3. It also wants to strike operative clause 7. And then it adds an operative clause, reiterates the illegality of trade in conflict diamonds, whether it be from a rival nation or rebel movement to usurp a legitimate government. And why we suggest, can you go back, George? Why we suggest that this could just be on one amendment, but then you're going to want to write the 2 separate lines of strike operative 3 versus strike operative 7. This is because if during voting procedure, someone wants to divide the question, which essentially makes one amendment 2 separate amendments to be voted on, then this would just help with that procedure. Because if, for instance, the sentence said strike operative 3 and 7, it just makes it a little trickier. So this is just a little more clear as to exactly what is being amended in the resolution. All right, ready for the next one. All right, some common mistakes to avoid in writing your resolutions. If this was happening, as we've done in years past, where you were writing resolutions at the conference, we'd be able to have these conversations there, and staff would be able to help you edit or format resolutions, but because you're submitting them prior, we wanted to give you some advice. So first, spelling and grammar mistakes. I know sometimes I forget to spell check a document. It can really, just be a last minute thought. After you're reading something so many times, you might forget to hit that spell check. But it is really important to look at it. It is something that staff considers when reviewing resolutions. A mistake that we see is mixing up preambulatory and operative clause phrases. They do serve different purposes. So as George explained, preambs are writing out the history and background, and they are pre-actions. And then your operative clause are really those actions, what solutions specifically the body is asking people to take. And then another mistake to avoid is incorrect punctuation on clauses. That's why it's a great idea to look at a sample resolution, maybe while you're editing. I know I prefer to write where I'll write to get all the words and my thoughts on the paper, and then editing and punctuation might come later. Just one style tip. All right, next one, George. Another mistake to avoid is a hanging subclause, or this is only one subclause. So we've seen this in years past, and it's just something that I think I want to talk about. So an improper example is this one here, where we have the number 3. The line states further requests, and then there's a subclause that has the second sentence that starts with member states. So if we think back to the rule that George gave us, is that a resolution should read like one long sentence, and the punctuation helps with that. We can see that this improper example, well, first it's 2 separate sentences, so that's one issue. But then additionally, we have the issue of the hanging subclause. So what we would suggest is just that you make, instead of using just one subclause, just make the sentence one sentence. And really, I should have a comma and here, but I think I have a period, so that's my bad. But we are suggesting that you shouldn't just use one subclause. It really should just be put into the main operative clause there. Right, next slide, George.
Yep. Really, the point of subclauses is when you have like a list, and if you're going to give a list of one thing, there's no reason to format it as a list. Just give that one thing as part of the statement. It also just makes it a lot easier to read.
And I think we're taught in schools, or at least I was, to not do run-on sentences, but that's essentially what a resolution is. So if you have a clause that does seem like a lot of lines on the page, that's okay. And looking at those sample resolutions from the United Nations will hopefully ease some concerns there. All right, so again, I'm going to talk more about subclasses. This is a passion project for me, apparently. So this is how I've seen subclauses used at conferences in the past, and there's a few different issues here. First, we have the issues. We have the use of subclauses. So as you see under subclause B, there is a subclause of 1 and 2. Really, it doesn't make this easier to read. In fact, looking at this, I think I don't want to read this at all. And it just is seemingly unnecessary. Really, the subclauses of 1 and 2 really could just be put into the same line as subclause B. But then another issue that we have here is that subclause C is its own preambulatory clause. And we know that because the words are uppercased, that takes note, and that is a preambulatory phrase. So really that should be its own separate clause, and it should be moved to the preambulatory clause section. So if you must use subclauses, as George said, they're really used to list details to the main clause, but they should not be separate sentences. So here we have a proper example. I think I put a green light here because for formatting issues and readability, I think you should really avoid subclauses. As I mentioned before, like you could see with this operative clause 2, which starts with calls upon, it does look like a long sentence, but that's normal. That's okay for resolutions. And then we have that, separate clause, number 3. You can break them up into their own separate clauses. If you really, really, really want to use a subclause, I have the yellow light there just saying proceed with caution. We want you to feel empowered to write this and supported in the way that you want to. But I just caution use subclauses in a limited circumstance. But if you're going to use them, just some tips. So try ending the main clause with what I'm going to call subclause trigger words, such as by, as I highlighted here. Or you could say to or as follows, and then you have the colon, and then you're going to list out your subclauses. And then each subclause is going to end with a semicolon if it's an operative clause, just like regular operative clauses end in semicolons. So some key takeaways. Good research is crucial. I'm sure you're already doing that for your position papers. So while you're doing your position paper research, start to think about how am I going to format a resolution out of this? Thanks, Stephen. And then work as a team. So you are going to be submitting resolutions as a delegation. We do say resolutions. Your delegation can submit more than one resolution. That is different than position papers. So you were told last week, if you joined, your delegation is only going to submit one position paper, but you can submit multiple resolutions. We do encourage you to be creative. You don't have to just do things that your country has actually done. You can think of innovative ways to try to solve the topics and issues before you. And then GA resolutions are going to be submitted online February 29th at 5 p.m. I think that's the 3rd time we mentioned it. And GA resolutions are not going to be submitted at MAMUN. I see Stephen said the actual UN rarely uses subclauses, and when they do, they never go below 1 level. Thank you. Sometimes I feel like I'm honing in too much on the subclause issue, but I just I don't know. I need to share it. I've dug too deep into the subclause grammar. So thanks for listening.
I can say I personally have written a resolution with that one had like, oh, A through F, and each of them had like 3 subclauses. It was not good. Don't do it. It made it really hard to read, and no one wanted to read.
Okay, so I see a question from someone. So they said, just to clarify, will we be writing 2 resolutions, one before committee and one during committee? Great question. So you're going to be writing your General Assembly resolutions before you come to MAMUN. And that's on the topic of the climate protection. So your delegation is going to work on writing that resolution and submitting that online. Then when you're in committee, that's when you'll be writing resolutions as well. And you can, in committee, you can write as many resolutions as you want. And you'll be writing those on the 3 topics that have been designated for your committee during the conference.
Are there any other questions?
Someone asked if there was a max length on resolutions. I do not believe so. I think you have a length requirement on your position paper, but on the resolutions, they could be as short or as long as you would like. I'm not sure if the submission form will cut you off at a certain point, but to my knowledge, no.
there's no reason to make a resolution longer than it has to be. Like adding in just more fluff doesn't help, but don't be afraid to add in detail. It's not like, oh, you get one page and that's it.
And I just thought, if you are worried, like, wow, this resolution is getting very long. What, students have done before is you can submit different resolutions that covers the same main topic, but are split into subtopics. So with the topic of global protection, that's quite broad. So you could write 2 or 3 resolutions that each focus on their own specific subtopic. Thank you. I did want to ask, oh, are people on the chat on the video, are you returning students? Or is this your first time coming to MAMUN? If you would just drop it in the chat, you know, first time or returning.